soul family. Britt Cannon here, host of the Walk On podcast, the podcast where I try to demystify spirituality, personal growth and healing, and whatever else I feel like talking about. This week's episode is called Mindful Communication. Before we get started, I just want to remind you to like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell to get notified when I post new content. I have a lot of exciting new stuff coming your way, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Thank you so much. Mindful communication. So conflict has a tendency to bring out the worst in us, or like the most extreme versions of ourselves. And it triggers those inner wounds, because it triggers like, I'm going to be abandoned. If I participate in this conflict, I'm going to be abandoned. Or, or if I let this person see the truth of me and how insecure I am, they're definitely going to leave. Or just like all of the harmful truths we internalize about ourselves when we're young and on our way to wounded, we let that loose during conflict or during communication. And the most important time to mindfully communicate is in conflict. So that's why I'm kind of like focusing on those specific kinds of conversations. We can resort to very unhelpful things like being really defensive, deflecting blame, feeling really shameful, and then causing that to turn into a kind of avoidant where we throw our wall up, we refuse to be vulnerable, and we don't get anywhere in the conversation. Another common mistake I see is people who go on the offensive in order to protect themselves. So they'll be really mean, really cruel, they'll attack, say the meanest thing that pops into their head in arguments, and that is not productive at all. Like, all that's going to turn into is either like a meh kind of like fight situation, or it's going to cause the other person to withdraw and feel like they can't trust you. Or it's just going to like plant seeds of doubt about you, about the relationship, or about the other person, about the relationship, and become those negative ego voices that we end up having to heal from. And I feel like the worst thing you can do to someone you love is like be someone they have to heal from. Like, if you're treating everyone lovingly and respectfully, even if things don't work out in the capacity you originally intended, that doesn't mean that they have to like heal from you. But if you are straight up jumping to the meanest thing you can think about them in every single argument, you're going to be someone they have to heal from. And that's kind of fucked up. Another thing that I really struggled with is people pleasing. So because I had a real disconnect between like the real time situation at hand and how I felt about it, so there would be like a strong delay on my emotions, I wouldn't know what I wanted or how I felt while the conflict was happening. And I had to really learn how to lay the boundary of like, hey, I know we're like in the middle of something, but I don't know how I feel about any of this right now. I'm just really overwhelmed. So would you mind if I took some time and we continued this conversation once I had my head on straighter? And some people were cool with that, some people weren't, but that ended up being what I really needed, because if I was being like forced to act and respond in the moment, I would either agree to terms that I didn't really agree with, that I was just agreeing with in the moment to like get along, or I would like the answer I would give wouldn't be true. Like it would just be like whatever, like, oh, I just want this to end. So sure, yeah, I'll tell you what you want to hear. And then weeks later, I'd have to be like, actually, that's not how I really felt. And then I look like a liar, So it was either giving in and going along to get along, or kind of like inadvertently, not maliciously lying, because I just didn't know how I felt yet. And I would like very quickly change my mind once I had time to process my feelings. So communication is tough, and we're not taught how to do it. Like, very few people had parents who gave them a good example of how to process conflict. Most people's parents, are either very rageful, and so there's yelling and screaming and name calling and all kinds of stuff like that. They become cold and withdrawn, and there's like a passive aggressive style of communicating. Or, like in my family, it was really like a gossip fest, like no one who had a problem with someone would directly communicate with them. Instead, it was just like shit talking and an indirect kind of conflict coming to a head. None of these things are ideal. I talked about this in my last video and the one before that, how like in a healthy relationship of any kind, whether it's work or romantic or platonic or whatever, familial, in a good healthy relationship where everyone's taking responsibility for themselves and is really wanting to do the work, the putting your ego aside work of cultivating and nurturing a healthy and loving and like mutually supportive relationship, it becomes like the two of you or the people involved versus the issue at hand. So someone's feeling insecure, or someone needs more time together, or someone needs a little bit of appreciation, like whatever it might be. Most things kind of amount to that. Either like I'm feeling insecure and like unloved, or I'm feeling underappreciated, or I'm feeling like we need to like touch base and connect with one another. And you can work together. Like, you hear the other person, you're open to their vulnerability, you hear them without becoming defensive, you feel what they're feeling, you are with them in their sharing of where they're at, and then you process all that and share what you're feeling and your perceptions, and the other person is open to you. And then once you like share stories, there's like a Venn diagram, so there's like this person's stuff, and in the middle is kind of like the common ground, and from there you can tackle the issue. I talk about in the podcast about how the healing and the mirror work that happens in your own individual life is not really that different from being in a relationship or like being in a friendship or just interacting with people. Like, you go on your solo journey of the soul and you encounter triggers, moments of wounding. You look at yourself in the mirror, you see the ways that you're not living up to your like potential as a loving being on this planet. Maybe you have issues with self-sabotage or substance use or, whatever, unhealthy relationships. Like, you just see these things like pop up as you walk your path. And as a spiritual person, your task is kind of to not run from those things. Something pops up and it scares you a little bit and you're like, oh God, I didn't know I did that. And then you're like, okay, I see it. I see you. I'm making friends with you. I'm shaking your hand. I'm integrating you. And now I know better. And so I can carry on with more information. And then boom, there's another one. It's time to heal that. And it's much easier, I feel like, in a solo spiritual journey to like understand that like no one's doing this to me, that these are things that are coming up because they're inside me. And so it's my responsibility to be like, this is a me issue, I'm working through it. But in relationships, because there is an other present, I feel like it's much easier for people to be like, this is you're doing this to me, you're making me feel jealous, you're making me do this, you're making me feel this. And that's ridiculous. Like, it's the same thing, relationships are gonna make us insecure. They're gonna bring up our triggers and wounds. There's gonna be times where either we're like, we're so happy that we're afraid of it ending and that triggers us, or we're prone to feeling abandoned, and so it's really easy for those feelings to come up in us. I've had a friend, a couple that are both my friends, and one day they were telling me that they got into a kind of a little tiff because one of them grabbed for the other one's hand when they were out in public and they didn't see it. And so they kind of like brushed it off and didn't hold their hand back. And it led to a whole fight that lasted hours. And when they finally came to, when everyone said what they were really feeling, it was as simple as that. It was, I reached for your hand and I felt like you rejected me. And then the other person was like, oh my gosh, I always want to hold your hand. I would never reject you. And it's that fucking simple sometimes. But because we're not shown how to do that, and because we don't trust one another, and if you're not comfortable with admitting your emotions to yourself, it's that much harder to admit them to the other, especially when you're like, you don't know that vulnerability and authenticity is like the way to have a sustainable relationship. If you think I have to hide myself, I can't be weak, I can't be insecure, I can't let this person know. Or if you're in the kind of relationship where you're at odds, where like there's a winner and a loser, and whoever has the most power in the relationship is the one with the least emotional investment, then it's a totally different story. And it might be better to let that relationship go, because if you're someone who needs that intimacy and needs that connection and is really trying to become a mindful communicator, and you're working with someone who doesn't want that at all, who thrives in the gray area, who loves keeping you on your toes, and who you feel like is always kind of running circles around you as far as like arguments are concerned, like they don't really seem to care about the issue so much as they care about keeping you off balance. It takes two to tango. You know, it's really hard to communicate mindfully on your own. You need someone else who's mindfully communicating to make it work. And that's just facts. There are people out there who are capable of this. There are people out there who, if they're not already practicing it, or at least going to be really attracted to it and grateful for it and like want to learn and participate in it. A lot of people I know who've been in a lot of abusive relationships who tend to veer on the side of codependent do really crave a mindful communication. It's just that they've been in a lot of abusive relationships where like everything they said was kind of like twisted to mean something else, or every vulnerable truth they shared was then later used against them, or, you know, it just always kind of went wrong. But when they get that stuff out of their life and they stop doing those relationships and they find authentic people who are healthy, people who are not really interested in manipulating others, who really want a genuine, true connection, they just kind of like, oh, thank God, because it's so much easier. So some like little tips, just a reminder that these are little 20-minute videos, but the full hour-long episode is in the description. I always touch on similar kind of touchstones of of the topic I'm discussing, but this video always ends up being a little bit different than the podcast. So if you're into podcasts, if you'd like to hear more, the link is in the description. So where was I? I just distracted myself with a shameless plug. Mistakes, common mistakes. So as I was saying, like the number one thing to stop doing if you're doing it is don't say the meanest possible thing you can think of. An issue in a relationship, no relationship is perfect. Relationships are supposed to have issues. Anytime you're putting yourself out there, I get triggered from work. I get triggered from my dog. I get triggered constantly. It is nobody else's fault that I have triggers inside me. It's not my fault either. You know, it's the people who abuse me. But they're there, and I know they're there within me. Like, I have abandonment issues, so I will sometimes have like big bouts of insecurity pop up because I have abandonment issues and I'm afraid of being left. But I don't put them on the other person. You know, I don't expect any relationship to be perfect. I don't expect there to never be issues. I'm no longer the conflict avoidant little Libra that I once was. I'm totally down for it. And I trust now that it can be a loving and even bonding experience. You know, when you have a really honest conversation with someone in service of continuing the relationship, it's amazing how much closer it can bring you. It doesn't have to drive these big wedges that end up ending the relationship. Actually, you can get closer and closer and closer and know each other better and better, and appreciate each other more, and also like learn how to love each other better. Once I know someone's weaknesses and wounds, I know what to steer clear of. I know what to avoid. And that's how that kind of information should be like used. It should be used in service of loving you better. It shouldn't be used against you to hurt you. So try to stop doing that if you're someone who just like boom, boom, pulls out the big guns every time some conflict happens. It doesn't have to be that way. You can train yourself out of it. If you're someone who deals with someone like that, then maybe talk to them about it and be like, this isn't a healthy thing that you do. Like, this hurts me. When you use my insecurities against me, it makes me not trust you, and it makes me not want to share with you. And I really want to share myself with you. So if we could work on that, it would be really great. Or if it's a couple that does that, take a step back, examine it. Why do you do that? Why do you get defensive? And do you know and understand that all that does is block opportunities for vulnerability, to really show and see and understand and love one another? Ditto with like the gossip, the inter-community gossip. Like, if what you really want is a community and a chosen family and a strong bond, but you're running around talking shit to everyone about everyone else, what you're doing is getting in the way of what you actually want. Because when those people find out what you've been saying about them, what do you think is going to happen? To continue trusting, it's like putting your hand on a hot stove. Burn me once, shame on me. What is the phrase? Burn me twice. No, burn me once, shame on you. Burn me twice, shame on me. Let me stop putting my fucking hand on the stove. And that's that on that. So, you got to get right with being vulnerable. You got to like get comfortable with the discomfort of sharing yourself and really admitting to your feelings. There's nothing wrong with having feelings. There's nothing wrong with being jealous. There's nothing wrong with being insecure. There's nothing wrong with being afraid of being left. There's nothing wrong with needing reassurance. Like, there's nothing wrong with feeling sad or feeling grief or just being a little needy. None of those things are crimes. They're just really kind of looked down upon in our society that is so like ruggedly individualistic. And that comes from capitalism, and fuck that. We don't bring capitalism into our relationships. So we need to get softer. We need to put down our ego. We need to get really comfy being seen, which is a very hard thing to do. It takes work for sure. You can feel a little raw. You can feel a little naked. You can feel a little like, oh, I hate this. But you get used to it. You get comfortable, and you'll start to see your relationships really flourish when you mindfully communicate. When you can say like an I feel statement, I'm feeling a little underappreciated, or I felt really sad and rejected when I thought that you didn't grab my hand, or I felt jealous when you went to dinner with your friend who I know you used to have sex with. And even though I trust you, it still made me feel a type of way, like just admitting to the truth of your feelings. We really like to complicate things and like put a fog up when we really could just, in a sentence or two, sum up the situation in an understandable way to the other person, and they can respond and react accordingly. It's really not that hard. It does take work, but once you start doing it, everything gets so much better and so much clearer, and you resolve things so much more quickly. And at the end of conflict, you feel better. And when I was in my previous healing life, every conflict, every situation, not only was it incredibly stressful, but also I would always leave it feeling worse. Worse because I abandoned myself and I didn't stay true to what I felt, or worse because the person would like hurl these insults at me, or worse because I knew the person was smiling in my face and was gonna talk shit about me later. or worse because I could feel the other person wasn't being vulnerable, or worse because my emotions were being met with like annoyance, or worse because the person just like threw up a wall and got super defensive and there was no chance of me getting through to them. And all of those were kinds of signs that maybe the person I was communicating with wasn't after what I was after. And that leads me back to what I talked about in my last episode, which is that, healing does require a little bit of a sacrifice. Not everybody can come with you. Not everybody is willing to do the work. And you kind of have to get okay with that. And you are okay with that, It's only going to bring a better quality of relationship. When you meet someone who mindfully communicates, or when you meet someone who's really excited about your ability to mindfully communicate, you just get to put down the baggage and the Jakey, it's okay, that's my dog. You get to just relax and be yourself. And ultimately, at the end of the day, all any of us want is to be seen, felt, and understood. That's love. We want to be unconditionally, not necessarily loved, but positively regarded. We want to be able to work it out when we fuck up. We want to be able to be imperfect and a little bit messy, and we want to have space to be a full human being, and we also want to give that to others, and that's beautiful. It just takes a little bit of mindful communication. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for clicking those links down below to my website. If you have a hard time with mindful communication and you would like to, or if you have a delay on your emotions like I was talking about with me, I have a self-love course, the link to which is in the description box, and that can help you get to know yourself, develop a dialogue with yourself, and learn how to tune into those feelings and emotions a little bit quicker. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for doing the work. I hope you have a beautiful week. Happy healing. Bye.